Oh, this proposed new bill that will allow terminally ill people to end their lives, this is England and Wales, has been described as the most robust in the world. Eligibility rules will include patients having less than 6 months to live and approval by doctors and a judge. MPs will get a free vote on the bill put forward by Labour's Kim Leadbeater at the end of this month. Of course, this could to and fro for many years between the House of Commons and the House of Lords. It does somewhat divide the room. We're going to get two views on this, both from eminent clinicians as well. We'll speak to Dr. Jacky Davies shortly. But first, with me, Dr. Cajetan Skowronski, palliative care doctor. Doctor, good afternoon to you.
Good afternoon, Ian. Thank you for having me on.
It's a pleasure. Nice to have you with us. Just give us an overview then. You're aware more than most people, because I know you talk a lot about this and you have big opinions on it. In principle, I was reading through the sort of caveats and the bullet points around this. It looks as if someone has thought about this, they've considered the implications, they've done their homework in making sure that this bill is not abused. Nonetheless, you feel it is woefully short, and I assume from everything I've read about you, you wouldn't want to see this in any form anyway.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks. So it's a very long bill, that's true. It's longer than any private member's bill that we've seen recently, and our MPs have got a very short time to scrutinise it, less than the 3 weeks which the bill stipulates people who wish to die should have to really consider their choice carefully. So that's a deep and bitter irony in itself. And then MPs will only have 5 hours to debate it before deciding on something which will affect the entire fabric of our nation and the way the NHS works and the relationship between doctors and patients. So that's one thing that I'm concerned about. In terms of these robust safeguards we've heard so much about, I was under the impression over the last few weeks of hearing about it from proponents of the bill that this bill was supposed to be targeted very specifically at a very specific group of patients who are suffering immense pain at the end of their life, which could not be treated effectively with the best quality palliative care. The bill that was published yesterday does nothing of the sort. It just opens the door to anybody with a diagnosis, with a prognosis of less than 6 months, a life expectancy of less than 6 months, to decide that they can end their life with a doctor's assistance for any reason whatsoever. There's no mention of pain. There's no mention of suffering. Anybody who manages to get a life expectancy of less than 6 months given to them by one doctor will be able to progress and request assisted suicide. So I'm deeply concerned by that, because most of my patients are frail and elderly and vulnerable, and many of them would qualify for this. And as we've seen in countries such as Canada and Belgium and Holland, one of the main reasons that people actually put forward when they're asked for why they want assisted suicide is that they feel they are a burden. And I have to say that I love our elderly population, but they can sometimes be a little bit too selfless. And in our current NHS, which the government recognises is broken, with our current social care system, which the government recognises is broken, there are an awful lot of patients on our wards who we come into contact who feel awful, and they say, I am a burden, I am blocking a bed. Isn't there any way you could get rid of me, bump me off, they say sometimes. And I'm able to say to them, absolutely not. We are going to do everything we can to improve your life, within the constraints of the system we have, and all of the staff around you will work their socks off to do that.
So you would be one of, would you, sorry to interject, Cajetan, yes, but you would be one of those doctors that would be able to intervene and say, actually, no, this patient is not somebody that should be able to consider this as an option, because we don't believe that their reasons are, authentic.
No.
We don't suggest that they are thinking this through from a clinical position, more of a
no,
as you say,
absolutely not. The reasons do not matter. The bill does not stipulate the reasons that a patient will be requesting assisted suicide. There can be any reason that the patient can say.
But if two doctors have to kind of green light that decision or endorse that decision, one would assume, based on what you've just said, that clinically and for whatever other reason, you would be one such doctor that would say no.
Certainly I would say no, but the bill doesn't stop you from shopping around until you find a doctor who says yes. And there are doctors, there's a spread of opinion amongst doctors, and there are doctors out there who believe for ideological reasons that, patient's choice is an absolute, and it doesn't matter the conditions under which they're making those choices. If they wish to end their life, they should have the right to end their life. And so you will find a doctor who will sign you off for it, and then a second doctor who will agree. And there's no safeguard in there to stop that from happening. And there's nothing that a judge can do. As far as I see, the role of judges there is just to hoodwink the public and hoodwink the MPs into thinking there's an extra layer of protection. We don't have enough doctors and enough judges to be vetting all of these requests in the time frame that's stipulated. We have 18 High Court judges who are capable of being involved in this, and it's been estimated that they would be having to handle 400 requests a year, and they've got other work to do. So it would just be a case of a rubber stamp.
On that, just a final point then, would there be anything, I mean, I'm sensing, Doctor, that you are fundamentally, in principle, ethically just opposed to this idea at all. Is there anything that could have been added or could still be added to this bill that would make you change your mind?
Well, I'm open to the idea that if they were able to come up with actual robust safeguards, if they could actually exist, it might be something that's possible. But as far as I've seen in every country that's tried this, and now in the bill that's being proposed, it is not possible to allow those very, very rare cases where it might be justifiable for someone to request assisted suicide to pass through, without allowing through many, many more of people who are vulnerable, or in feeling that they're a burden, or whatever reason, and under pressure by their friends and family. So the bill says that we have to sort of be satisfied that the patient isn't under pressure from their friends and family or whoever else around them. And let's be honest, lots of people will pressure their relatives into this because inheritance is involved. And if elderly people spend the last few months of their life in care, that's a lot of money in the inheritance that's eaten away. So you'll get a lot of ulterior motives in family members.
You'd have to be a particularly wicked kind of character, wouldn't you? How many of these sort of almost pseudo-murderers do you think are out there?
I mean, if you've ever worked with, the general public, if you've ever worked in public services, you see the reality that this is how a lot of people behave, and I think if we pretend that's not the case, then all we're doing is leaving the vulnerable people to these wolves.
I hear that. Of course, that has to be a
we as doctors and we as the NHS will be complicit in those crimes.
Listen, Doctor, a very thorough position on this, Dr. Cajetan Skowronski, a palliative care doctor. Let's speak to Dr. Jacky Davies, consultant radiologist. Jacky, good afternoon to you.
Good afternoon.
It does divide not just the general world, but also the clinical world. And you've heard from a clinical colleague there who's very emphatic that there is no place for this. He senses a lot of potential abuse and believes it's ill thought through. Now, it may just be, as I did suggest to him at the end there, that he is just inherently and fundamentally against this, and that's fine. It's a democracy. What is your position on this as a senior clinician of much experience?
I, of course, have campaigned for this for years, and I would really wish that people like the colleague who you just interviewed would go to places where this is working. 200 million people, more than 200 million people around the world have access to this. Oregon, where this started, have got experience of over 25 years now. There have been no slippery slope. There's been no evidence of coercion. There's been no danger to disabled people or the vulnerable. They just get on with it. I've been there. It's very impressive. It's still less than 1% of deaths. And it's just now part of the spectrum at the end of life, compassionate offering to patients. This bill is very much modelled on that. We're not inventing the wheel. And I'm just so shocked at some of the things that I've just heard. Interestingly, there was another palliative care person talking this morning saying, what patients are in danger from their relatives is their relatives don't want them to do this. And I've heard instances of relatives blocking assisted deaths for their loved ones because they don't want them to go yet. And so that's where the pressure, much more likely, the pressure is likely to come from than some weird scenario about inheritance.
Well, I was going to say, you don't really recognise the, let's kill Granny for a few quid kind of argument, which is the one that the doctor before you was essentially advancing.
I have been in medicine for many years, obviously. I've never had a patient who said to me, can you bump me off because I'm a nuisance. That has become a kind of straw man, that it just doesn't exist. And this business about, it doesn't mention suffering or anything, it's not for us to say what is intolerable for patients who are already dying. Mm. These are not people, some scenario where they walk in and say, I want to die. These are people very specifically who are already dying, and it's about shortening their deaths, not shortening their life.
When you look at this bill as it's currently set out, does it have everything, Jacky, in there that you would want to see in there? Is there something missing, something that Oregon you mentioned, which is almost a sort of go-to example of where this appears to have worked rather well? Is there something they're doing that we should be doing in this bill? I know it's early days yet. This could take years before it becomes law if it does.
Well, there really isn't, because this is modelled very closely on the Oregon bill, and I think that's good, because that is the model that has been taken in most of the assisted dying setups around the world, Australia, New Zealand, of course many countries are doing this now. I think the addition of a judicial review should reassure our opponents, but of course people like the colleague who just interviewed, who are inherently opposed to this, no safeguard is ever going to be enough for them, and that's their position. But the medical profession, there are many, many people in the profession who are pleased that this might become law, really hope it does, who are willing to participate, and who will listen to colleagues abroad to see the very best way we can do this for our patients.
Just a final point. One of the suspicions or the concerns over this appears to be, and a previous contributor mentioned this to us, is that this could be the thin end of the wedge. This is what the bill looks like at the moment. It could become looser as we go. You're a radiologist. You know what unsavoury bumps and blips look like on a scan that shouldn't be there. Are you going to show that to a patient in years to come and they go, don't like the look of that one, doctor, can I go now, please? And off they go to the clinic to be dispatched. I mean, are we going to get to such a stage, do you think, where it becomes even easier to take that final journey?
That is a really important point, and of course it's one of the arguments that's being used. But when the Health Select Committee looked at this, they came to the conclusion that in no jurisdiction that had adopted the Oregon model had there been a slippery slope. Now you will hear people talking about Canada, as our colleague did. The Canadian law has been quite different because of the legal setup between Parliament and the courts. That could not happen here. If the law be passed, it's the law we'll get, and that'll be it, because everybody will be happy with it, and no one has ever tried to reverse the law. Listen,
Jacky, thank you for your time. Really appreciate that. Dr. Jacky Davies, consultant radiologist. She specialises in paediatric and breast imaging and has campaigned for a long, long time to have this proposal become a reality. But you heard the previous doctor speaking, whose voice and views were entirely on the opposite end of this debate. Over to you on this one.